Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Susan Carter, CEO of She Recovers. My pronouns are she, her, and I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, on the traditional lands of the Tiwa people. I'm going to start off with a little bit of a history lesson with a few highlights. 11 years ago, in 2011, when our co-founder, Dawn Nickel, was on a 4-month stress leave due to severe workaholism, she started her blog called Recovering Dawn to write not from her head, but from her heart and discover all things women were recovering from and the ways they were doing it. Joined by her precious daughter, Taryn, also in recovery, they launched a public Facebook page. And the following year in 2012, they actually created a website. 10 years ago, they hosted their first in real life intimate retreat. As of today, they've hosted more than 43 retreats, most sold out months in advance. 5 years ago, they launched the She Recovers Coach Designation Program and hosted the first She Recovers International Conference to a sold-out crowd in New York City. Then, just 4 years ago, articles of incorporation were filed in hopes of establishing a nonprofit organization. At the same time, the She Recovers private Facebook page was launched. Then 2 years later, in March 2020, the pandemic hit. She Recovers was able to pivot and meet the demands of women to connect by creating online Zoom gatherings. The community exploded. And 1 month after everyone was experiencing lockdown, we received official notification from the IRS that She Recovers had been granted nonprofit status. Talk about divine timing. As everyone knows, I do believe in divine order. We've experienced monumental growth over the past 28 months, all made possible by a core of more than 100 dedicated volunteers and a tiny team of 10, mostly consultants. The mail you might see, if you do see in this Zoom, is our amazing legal counsel, Andy Halpern, who's guided our organization through all things legal since our early inception. So today we are celebrating another milestone in the history of the organization by launching the She Recovers Global Chapter Network. This is a mark in time for what I believe to be the world's most powerful grassroots movement to break the stigma and shame associated with being in recovery. This will enable women to connect in person and in community. This will enable us to not only help women in or seeking recovery, but to educate and empower key influencers to change the way we talk about and treat behavioral health for women. Just being on this call makes you one of the strongest advocates we have to enable change. You are the forward thinkers, the catalyst, the founders of change that will create a world where all women in or seeking recovery are celebrated, supported, and deemed essential to healthy communities. Thank you for joining us today to learn more about how you can impact the world we live in right there in your own community. Now it is my great honor and privilege to introduce you to Kelly Zelinka. Kelly joined our small but mighty team just 3 short months ago as director of the Global Chapter Network. Once again, divine order. Kelly comes to us with extensive nonprofit experience in leadership management. As I've said time and time again, launching a nonprofit is not for the faint of heart, but creating and developing a structure to create systemic change in communities around the world is nothing short of frickin' amazing. Again, it's my honor to introduce you to our chapter Wonder Woman, Kelly Zelinka, to walk you through the chapter application process and share more about how you can be a part of this historical movement.
I'm happy to be with you today. Thank you for that intro, Susan. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a woman in recovery from childhood trauma, depression, disordered eating, and cancer. And that is the first time I have ever said those words in front of a public audience. I'm so grateful to be with She Recovers. One of the reasons I was excited to join this specific nonprofit is because it accepts all patchworks and pathways to recovery, and it accepts people who are in recovery or seeking recovery. And I think it is so important to have that type of openness and acceptance of people, no matter where they are in their journey. I know I've just started, but I've heard so much about chapters. I mean, clearly because I'm leading the chapter work, but really I understand how long this has been. People have been waiting for this, and I want to thank you all for continuing to ask for this and really bringing the momentum to this moment for us. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend time going through the application. In just a minute, I'm going to get off the screen and I'm going to put the application in front of us. At the end, we're going to have time to go through question and answer. I'm going to try to hold my comments to no more than 20 minutes. Maybe I can even get it short of that because we really want to have time for you to ask questions. It's recorded, so you can go back and pick this up later. We're also going to post Q&A on the web by next Thursday. So all the questions asked here, we will post those answers and you can also pick those up. And I will be available for questions up until the time the application is due. So any question you send to srfchapters@sherecovers.org, I will get. If I can't answer, I'm going to at all times engage my colleagues to help me answer the question. We will get back to you with those. So you have multiple ways to get in touch with us and learn more about this application. It's a long application. I know that. What we tried to do is try to put everything in one place so you could get it all in that contained space. So it's long. I understand that some of you may not have had time to read it through yet, and that's fine. Hopefully today, if you haven't had the time, you'll get a little bit of orientation to the sections. I'm going to go over the main points of the sections. I won't be able to go into all of the details, but as I said, there are ways for you can read it over and you can touch base with us if there's something that you can't find later. So I'm going to start with, of course, we're going to talk about the vision, mission, intentions, guiding principles, and core values. Susan touched on that. She got us grounded in that. This is what grounds us. It should ground you in the application. If there are ways in your application narrative that you can talk about your connection to the vision, mission, principles, and core values, please do that. I know for me, any given week, there's a different guiding principle that I feel resonates with me. If you have those kinds of experiences or you're just thinking about the chapter, tell us what this means for you. So really, very simply put, in its simplest terms, the purpose of the chapter network is to expand the reach of She Recovers support and resources. You all are here today because you know how valuable this is, and we want that to spread. In doing that, we want to make sure we're inclusive of all women and providing space for Black women, Indigenous women, women of color, LGBTQ, Spanish speaking, differently abled, etc. So as you're filling out your application, please tell us if or how you can help us reach these women in your community. Non-chapter locations and activities, we've gotten quite a few questions about this already. There are going to be some people who are on this call reading this application who decide it's not the right time for their community to apply, and that's okay. Or we might not select your community. There are a lot of people who are interested in this, and we're only selecting 5. So if you are not selected or you're choosing to wait to a future time to apply, that is fine. You can still go ahead and do activities in your local community. You can still conduct a sharing circle. You can still have meetups. That's totally fine. We don't want to stop any of that necessary, those offerings in your community. We still want to be able to reach women even if you don't have a chapter. We're going to be creating toolkits and such that will help you launch things like sharing circles. That is due to come out at the end of August. So inside or outside of a chapter, you will still be able to do these activities. There are specific benefits that come with being a chapter. and why it makes sense to create a chapter. And I'm going to go into those in a little bit more detail later. I just want to assure people, chapters does not mean you can't do some activities in your local community that you might already be geared up to do. So minimum requirements to be considered for a chapter. What is an important thing to know here is that chapters are going to be part of the She Recovers organization. So we have our 501c3 nonprofit status. Chapters are under that same 501c3 designations. So we are paying a lot of attention to sort of this administrative and operational thing and asking that minimum requirements be met both programmatically and administratively, because we are one organization together, right? So we want to make sure that we are really strong when we do this, and that we have given you the resources to be able to prepare to do that locally. So some of those minimum requirements are alignment with the mission, of course, that you have a Facebook community group, or that you'll be able to start one at the time or close to when you launch your chapter. Some other things are that you have commitment to using only She Recovers trained facilitators where those are required, and that you have the willingness and ability to recruit volunteers to help you run your chapter in your community. That's going to be essential. There are 5 core volunteers who are going to be ultimately responsible for the operations, but those individuals are going to need help. So another minimum requirement is that you're willing to take on the management of local volunteers. Again, I'm not reading this in detail because I don't want to just spend the whole time talking at you all. So there are a couple categories of activities. There's program activities and administrative activities. And in each of those categories, there are minimum requirements. In this section is program activities, and these 5 bullets go over what they are. But what I want to point out in more detail is, as you go through the program section, it breaks it out into different groups. What I was talking about was the program activities and what is required. So as you go through, you'll see what I want you to pay attention to is where you see required. So online connection groups, it's a requirement that you have a Facebook group. Again, if you don't have that going currently, get that, you have the intent of getting it going shortly after at launch. Also required is use of the She Recovers web portal, which we will be hosting on our page and you will have access to. That's where we're going to exchange a lot of information, where you will upload documents, where you'll have access to the toolkit, where you can post information about your chapter so women can find your local chapter. In real life connections and service groups. So there are 4 in this category. You'll note the one that says it's required is sharing circles on at least a monthly basis. Again, if you don't have it going right now, this is something that we can help you with. It's all about describing what your vision is for your chapter and telling us, we're ready to do this. We're going to need a month on this. We're going to need your support on this. But know that we'll want you to be talking about sharing circles in your narrative. You can also say, hey, yes, we're going to start in-person yoga, and describe to us what that's going to look like for you. And informal meetups or get-togethers, hangouts, that's stuff that does not require anything formal. There's no registration for that. You're not printing materials, nothing like that. People getting together for coffee and supporting each other in recovery. But again, one is required, so make sure you're talking about that one in your narrative. This next section of program, educational program and community outreach, there's 5 different portions to it. The only one of this that's required, so you'll want to talk about at a minimum, is community outreach and collaborations. So this is connecting with local treatment centers, clinicians, et cetera, who are aligned with the She Recovers mission and might be helpful to your work in the community. So you're going to want to reach out to them, talk about how you're going to do that, tell them about She Recovers, what you have to offer. Maybe you're going to be talking about formal or informal referral relationships, things like that. So we'll want you to think about what that looks like in your community. You can also say, yes, we are ready to go with the book club. We just need to know how to get started to do that, right? That's not required, but you can offer that we want to do that. We think women will really appreciate that and need that. That's something where we're going to be developing a little like party in a box type thing, or mini toolkits, if you will, to say, if you want to start a book club, this is what you need to do. This is how you start. Here's some suggested readings, things like that. So this is one of the places, again, that we're going to have some resources available for you. The next category is fundraising events. The only required one here is the one that is the She Recovers signature event, which you can see is launching September, October of this year. The chapters won't be formally up and running yet. We might be reaching out to people in communities to say, we want you to be part of this. And this is our signature event, Movement Equals Medicine. So it's aligned with Mental Health Awareness Month. It's a peer-to-peer fundraising opportunity, a campaign to get the word out, to raise funds for She Recovers. It's about movement being key to recovery. Next year, 2023, chapters will definitely be involved in this. So just be thinking about that. It might be one of those places where you're not quite sure how to talk about that in your application, but tell us generally what your approach is to fundraising, how you think that you're going to be able to work with headquarters on that. And you might have your own fundraising event ideas. If you do, let us know what those are. So that's a really quick overview of the program required portions. Again, you might be proposing things in addition to that. The next section is administrative activities and responsibilities, and all of these are required. Don't let the long list intimidate you. Again, this is really about making sure that operationally we're sound, right? We are an organization together. We have headquarters, we have chapters, we're part of the same. So we just want to make sure that we're all aligned. We're going to ask you to sign a chapter agreement. We're going to ask you to review and agree to the policies that you're going to be able to implement locally. Things like making sure that you can track your attendance and your volunteers, that your volunteers are trained, that you're recruiting women locally, that you are providing reports when needed to the headquarters, et cetera. So read over those. And make sure that you understand what they're about. And if you need to ask questions, that's fabulous. Please do that.
What do you got there? What do you got there?
The next section is roles and the org chart. So the roles, the key, there are 5 key volunteer roles in the chapter that we want you to fill. And these are going to be the core people who are implementing all chapter activities. The chapter chair is going to be the person who kind of oversees everything and has that higher level perspective and kind of the strategic vision for the chapter. We also want you to have a communications and outreach lead to work with your Facebook administrator and your chapter portal. Development and fundraising lead to be key, to be point person on any of your fundraising activities. Events and communication lead. If you're hosting a community service event or you're having someone come talk about self-care during recovery, this is the person that would manage that. Finance and accounting lead. This will be the person that has access to a small bank account and a debit card and will make purchases on behalf of the chapter. These are described in more detail at the end of this, where you'll find all of the job descriptions. That job description will also talk a little bit about the minimum eligibility requirements for the people filling those roles and the time commitment, which is, we anticipate 30 to 35 hours per month per each of those 5 volunteers. It's going to be a bit of a lift, I think, to get chapters going. It could be a little more or a little less than that, depending on the size of the chapter and the amount of activities that you're starting out with. This is just a spiffy graphic about the chapter structure. So these are the leads here. And you'll notice we expect that each of the leads is going to have to manage their own small team of volunteers to help them actually do the work on the ground. So that was a lot of requirements. So let me just talk a little bit about what you gain by being a chapter. So as I said, we're part of the same organization, but what headquarters is going to do on behalf of the chapter is the tax filing and all of those legal activities, right? You won't have to do any of that. We'll take that on, as well as I didn't realize until recently that, thanks to Andy, that each state has requirements, legal requirements, if you want to do fundraising activities in those states. We're going to take on the filing of those documents and make sure everything's in place for that. We're going to host the chapter portal. We're going to provide a small amount of a budget to each chapter so that you can do things like if you're having an event and you need to print materials, you'll have money to do that. If you've exhausted all efforts at finding an inexpensive venue for an event and you need to pay for it, you'll have a small amount of money to do that. So that's one of the benefits. And really, I think the other big benefit is that it elevates the status of She Recovers in your community, right? She Recovers is a going concern in your community as an entity who has a voice in the local recovery world. And I don't think that's to be underestimated. Recovery becomes more accessible and acceptable when we have a direct personal connection and we can see people in our community who are being that voice. So those are some of the benefits. So what does the application actually look like? There is a required cover sheet. The cover sheet has, and I'll scroll down to that in a second, it lists all of your key volunteers by name, and it lists your Facebook administrators by name. So that's the cover sheet that's required. And then there's also a narrative response. There's 6 questions, multi-part questions that you have to provide a narrative to. You can also provide supporting documentation. So let's say there's an organization you've been working with locally who's a big supporter and mission aligned with She Recovers, and they want to write you a letter of support. Absolutely include that. You're welcome to, it's not required, but you're welcome to include it. It paints the picture of what's happening in your community and what you're bringing to the chapter. You can submit those in 2 ways. One is the web-based form. So there is the website. If we have time, Lisa will quickly take us through that. But you can submit that all online, and you can, if you don't finish it the first time, you can come back and finish it later. You could also choose to create your own Word document for the narrative, upload that into an email along with the cover sheet, and send it to srfchapters@sherecovers.org, and I will get that. It has to be submitted no later than 4 p.m. Eastern time on Friday, September 16th. So that gives you 6 weeks or so to work with your community to put this together. Evaluation and selection. Okay, so we have committed to selecting 5 chapters. That maybe doesn't seem like a lot. The reason that we're doing that is because we want to be able to do it well. We're a small team of people, and we have a lot to accomplish, and we really rely on the passion and dedication of our volunteers. And we want to make sure that the chapters get off to a good start. So we want to have the capacity to support you well, which is why right now we're limiting it to 5. We anticipate in the not too distant future being able to add more chapters, and we will keep you updated. If this goes swimmingly and like we are off to a great start, we're going to be able to have more chapters start sooner. And we would anticipate also being able to add chapters in Canada and elsewhere. So right now, I don't know if Susan mentioned this when I was briefly cut off in the beginning or lost connection. But She Recovers Canada does have their 501c3 designation, but now we need to understand how to connect them legally. And when we do that, then we can open this chapter network up even more broadly. Our selection committee will be made up of a combination of staff, board, and community members. And we will be using objective criteria to evaluate your application. And we really want to be transparent about that. So we've included those criteria in this application. So for example, you're talking about your volunteer lead team and you're answering those questions, this is how we're going to be looking at your answer. Did the applicant identify volunteers for those roles that can meet the minimum requirements of the job description? So as you're completing your application, look back at these evaluation criteria and kind of, look at what you're proposing to your proposed answer. And they're going to be able to evaluate my answer based on these criteria. I also want to just give a few suggestions for how to build a strong application. I'm going to try to wrap up in about 3 minutes here, so we have plenty of time for Q&A. I would recommend that you meet with your local team or the portion of the team that you have, and maybe you're seeking more people to fill out that team of 5. Think about your first year and what you can reasonably do in that year together. Think about the program minimums and the administrative program minimums, and talk about how you're going to do that and how you would articulate that in an application. We know that not everybody is going to have everything in place right out of the gate, and that's okay. What we just want to understand is what's your vision locally. So you want to start a sharing circle, but you think maybe you're 3 months away from doing that because you haven't identified someone who can be the coach. Talk to us about this. We want to see what your vision is, and we want to see that you're on the right path, and that you feel confident that you can get there in a relatively short period of time, even if on day 1 you're missing a couple components. That's okay. When you're writing a response, please provide good context and fully describe your ideas and your community. There might be people on the selection committee that know your community, but there probably will be many who don't. So to write your application as though you're speaking to a new audience, that will kind of help you get in the frame of mind of really describing what it is that's going to happen locally with this chapter. And it will help us evaluate that. We think many communities are going to apply. So the better picture you can, the more clear picture you can paint, the easier for us to understand what it will mean to women in your community. If you have any data locally about how many women are attending events or that type of thing, please include it. Or you can include examples of what you're doing locally, just, non-identifying examples. Talk with potential partners. You don't need commitments from partners at this point. If you happen to have them, that's great, but tell us who you're talking to and the types of partnerships that you are thinking about or beginning to work on right now. Yes, so those are some tips to think about as you go through this. And again, look at the evaluation criteria. Here are some key dates for you. Applications due on Friday, September 16th. When we get those, they will go to the committee for evaluation. The week of October 17th, we want to have a discussion with the finalists. If you are one of the communities that we have those discussions with, it doesn't automatically mean that you'll be selected as a chapter. What it means is that we want to understand more about what's happening locally for you, and that is an opportunity for us to ask some more specific questions that maybe we couldn't pull out of the application. You'll be notified the week of October 31st, and everyone will be notified. If you're not a selected chapter, but you did apply, we will send you an email letting you know that this time you weren't successful, but we hope you're going to come back again. And then November, we'll sign agreements, chapter agreements. December, we won't schedule anything because it's a high volume vacation time. And then January, we'll train and officially launch. You'll get the toolkit. We'll do some training. We'll have online training available so that you can take it at your convenience. Okay, and as an approved chapter, let's see, what haven't we covered? Chapter support. I and the She Recovers team will be here to support you as you get launched as a chapter. There'll be some monitoring and reporting that will be required, which we can talk more with you about later. And then we go into the application documents. I want to point out one thing here. So as I was saying before, if there's some things that you think you can't meet immediately upon launching, just let us know that. So if that's the case, and you're answering this question here, can your chapter meet the minimum requirements as specified in the application? There's one thing that you aren't going to meet on startup, say unsure. That clues us into asking more about that, and you'll want to describe more about that in your narrative then. I am going to turn it over to Lisa in a moment here. Let me see. At the end of this are job descriptions and the policies. Please make sure you take a moment to read the chapter policies. And just know that going into 2023, as we support these chapters, we also will be, it's my goal to be hosting periodic meetings with communities, multiple communities, to talk about if you weren't ready to apply to be a chapter, how can you get ready? And have those discussions with us. So there will be opportunity to talk about that because we want to be able to add chapters to the network. And before I turn it over to Lisa, one last thing. This was a huge lift to get this out the door. And I want to take a moment to thank my colleagues, Lisa, Liana, Elise, Carrie, Susan, Dawn, Andy, Regina, others who I may have forgotten, but thank you all so much for supporting this and supporting this chapter network, and to getting to this day and beyond. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa right now for some Q&A.
So wonderful. Thank you for that detailed presentation, Kelly. And we so appreciate the timeline that you've put together, how organized this has been. You have just taken this and run with it and really brought it to life. So thank you so much for all of your hard work as well. Just going to pull up the questions. So I'm going to break these up into different segments. We've had some brilliant questions in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly try to respond to some of those first, and then we'll get some spoken questions brought forward here. But I'm just going to submit these ones to you because they're all chapter related. The first one is, will the first 5 chapters be in the US? And if so, will there be a rollout for Canada?
Yes, thank you for the question. The first 5 chapters will be in the United States, and as soon as we have the legal arrangement finalized with Canada and we have the capacity to take on more chapters, we will do that. So we would anticipate being able to share more information about the exact timeline in the coming months. The coming months after launch of the initial cohort. So 2023.
The next question is, what if I don't know who some of the other chapter leads might be in my application?
Yes. A couple different things. If you have a group of women locally who you're talking with who are She Recovers members or part of the community, you can talk to people about their availability, their interest in being one of the lead roles, share the job description with them. Is this the question just about the lead roles, or is this about having coaches, Lisa?
No, this is just about for folks who are filling out the application. If they just don't know perhaps who one of the volunteer leads might be, are they still able to submit an application?
Got it. Okay. I would say that the closer you can get to 5, the better. Talk with others who are part of your community about their interest, share the job description. And if you're short 1, I would say don't let that prevent you from submitting it, because we can have a discussion with you about what it would look like. If you can get to 5, that's the preference though.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is, what are the geographical limits and or reach of a chapter? Does it need to be a city? So for example, Victoria versus Vancouver Island as a catchment area.
Yeah, we did a little back and forth on that internally, trying to decide, and we determined that we were going to leave it up to local communities because you know what's happening on the ground. So it could be a city, it could be a county, it could be whatever region locally makes sense to you. Because in my community, you know, I would know, well, this is sort of this natural boundary where people kind of orient in this other direction if you're living here, but the people within, you know, at this street level kind of orient here, right? We want you to tell us about that. If we get applications that seem to cross over with each other, then what we would do is we'd have a conversation with you. We might connect two applicants about maybe joining into one chapter, things like that. So we want you to tell us what makes most sense to you, and then we'll take it from there.
Awesome. These are coming in so quickly. It's so wonderful. The next question is, will it likely be larger communities chosen for the first launch, or how are you making the decision on which communities are going to be chosen?
Mm-hmm. No, it's not necessarily larger or smaller. It's the community who's most prepared at this point to really do the functions of the chapter, both administrative and programmatic. That could be a small community that's just rocking and ready to go, and you serve 50 women, but you're a small municipality. That's fine. So it could really be either of those, and we're going to make the decision based on the evaluation criteria in the application. So if you look at that, you'll notice there are no numbers there that we're asking you to meet. It's all about your ability to manage the activities at your local level.
Awesome, thank you. And do we have any idea of when a second launch might occur?
Not yet. I would hope that in 2023, after we get this first cohort going and we really get a sense of how that's working, and then we understand what's happening legally with the US and Canada relationship, I would hope that sometime in early 2023, we can start sharing more information about what we think is next.
Awesome. So I'm just going to ask folks to hold the questions in the chat just so I can get through these last few, and then we're going to take some raise hand questions, people bringing their voices forward. But this next one is also for you, Kelly. How does one fill out an application and put all of the other names down without other people essentially duplicating? So for an area, let's say for San Francisco, if someone is filling out a chapter application, how do they know that they're not duplicating work that someone else maybe has already submitted, or can they?
Right, that's a great question. I'm not entirely sure there's a way to avoid that in a dense area where you might have multiple chapters. So I would just suggest you do the best you can to connect with the community to find out if there are other chapter applications going in. If that's true, consider whether you might join in an application or then come up with your own proposed boundaries for where you might split into two different chapters. There's a question on the cover page of the application that asks if we have your permission to share your information with another chapter who might, or another applicant who might be in your area. That's one of the ways that we want to try and connect where this kind of thing might be happening. So that's my best suggestion.
It also sounds like this might be a great opportunity to bring forward a community group, an existing community group, which I've just posted a link to in the chat. But for people who are listening in, you just visit sherecovers.org and click on community and then community groups. It sounds like these Facebook groups that are pre-existing, most of them are active, some of them are not, but they all are stewarded by volunteers. Perhaps those spaces can be used as incubators for people to be having these conversations. So, you know, for example, if you do live in the Boston area, that's been brought forward a couple of times with questions, you know, join that Facebook group to see if there are other people who want to be involved. It's a great way to get that conversation started. I will transparently say that, you know, we really focused on building the chapter network here first and how that was going to roll out to inform how we steward and support the volunteers in these spaces that are untethered or don't have a chapter. So we understand that those resources haven't been provided to community groups. So anybody who does volunteer to steward those spaces or is a participant, and perhaps there's been inactivity or you're not sure, you know, how those groups are going to be supported, that is part of our next plan in this launch strategy. So please know we're not leaving you hanging. We just really wanted to make the large, the development and the large launch here first so we could successfully build out to support with resources for some of these smaller containers. So I just wanted to bring that forward as part of the response. Something else that I'm hearing in the chat as well is, you know, the 30 plus odd hours a week for the volunteer leads at the beginning is a fair amount, a fairly large commitment. So do you foresee that, that requirement being carried forward, or after the chapter launches, do you see a reduction in those hours, and or are these lead roles paid positions was another part of that question.
Okay. The lead roles are not paid positions. A lot of what She Recovers Foundation does, as you know, is volunteer driven and managed. The 30 to 35 hours was our best guess. It could vary a lot. It could be less than that. It could be more. I do think that in the initial launch period, the first 6 months to a year, it'll probably be a little bit more than after. The other way to manage that 30 to 35 hours is the more volunteers that you can get locally to support, not lead now, but additional volunteers to support events, for example, the less that that person might have to do, the lead might have to do, because you've got additional support. So again, that's our best estimate. And yes, it's a per month estimate. So that would be 6 hours a week, 6 to 7 hours a week. Maybe that sounds a little bit better than 30 to 35 hours a month. I don't know. If you think it's going to take less than that, maybe it will. That's something, again, that you can talk to us about. But we really wanted you to have what we think is a pretty realistic estimate. So you go in eyes wide open and to what you are likely going to need to commit.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for clarifying that. We just have an adjunct question that I quickly want us to address. We may have just not made this clear in the initial who can apply or when can we apply. So who and where are the first 5 chapters? I know that you have already spoken to that, but could you quickly remind us?
Sure. So the first 5 chapters will be in the United States, and they can be any community, large or small. You get to determine your own geographic boundaries, and we are selecting those chapters based on the objective criteria that are in the application, so you can see those. So as you're developing your application, look at those and do your own assessment of how well you are, how well you're meeting those evaluation criteria.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to put a pause on the chat questions that I curated throughout the first half of the conversation. So please know if you have asked something in the feed, we will go back to that. But I just want to bring forward a participant here, Heather, who has their hand raised. Heather, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. Hi, I just had a couple questions come forward. So I know we have a Facebook group that's not very active. However, just thinking about the chapter launch and what Kelly was saying about kind of people knowing more on the ground who are in the communities. The one that I'm from Long Island, New York, and we have New York City / Long Island. Long Island in itself is a beast. And I could see us definitely having once, I would think those would be 2 places that chapters eventually would be launched and doing some things together. But I don't know if there's a possibility of separating those so that we can kind of, and get somebody maybe that we can just reach out to kind of split those up at this point, if we're going to start working on this.
Yes, I definitely can see why there would be more than one chapter there. Do you have contacts in the other area? So
I have a couple people that I'm going to reach out to. I have 2 or 3 people that definitely might be interested, but my one question also leading into that would also be one of the people who I think is I've talked to very much about helping me. I know in the application it's saying 1 year sobriety. Does that need to be a continuous sobriety, or can that be like, I mean, if somebody's very active, wants to be very active in the community and is on a path, can we have some flexibility with that?
Right. So to the first part of the question, let me say that if we see applications coming from New York, again, we could potentially make that connection for you. Okay. And there could be an additional conversation that we could help facilitate. I'm going to ask Lisa or Susan to answer the second part of that question.
Okay.
So I'm happy to jump forward if you like, Susan. In terms of recovery, we really do believe we're all recovering from something, even as just women or non-binary individuals in any space, we're likely recovering from something, right? And so we don't have specific requirements related to your sobriety. We do just ask that you have dedicated and sustained recovery, whatever that means for you in your personal pathway and patchwork. So,
Okay,
right, it's not just restricted to sobriety. Obviously, these volunteer positions are safety sensitive positions, so we really need to take that into consideration as well. But the sustained recovery can look very different for other people.
Perfect. That's what I needed to know, because that was an important question, even for me as somebody who's almost 4 years in, like who I would be doing this with to have the connection with. Because as you said, I think something in there says somebody that you can already work with, or somewhere in the paperwork that I read. And I see somebody from New York City made the comment too, like it's very hard for us to get together in the comments. And then my last question too, I know one of the things that you had mentioned was reaching out as part of our application process to be able to have where we would be going for community outreach, and to maybe reach out to a couple of people beforehand so that we could be prepared to put that within our application. Would there be any materials specifically that you could provide us if we were to go to an outreach and say, hey, this is what we're all about. This is what we envision doing. We're going to be starting this chapter up possibly in January. Do you think we could work together and get something rolling?
So I'll start by saying that would be sort of the ideal, that you'd have those conversations. It's not a requirement, but what I think it does is help paint the picture. So that's great if you can do that. And I think that I'm pretty confident that we have some collateral that you could use to talk about who She Recovers is. There might be less about chapter specifically, but I think that we have material that we would be able to provide for that. And I'm going to look to Lisa to confirm that that's true.
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sure I'll think of more, but that's all for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Another question related to chapters, and then I might hop in, Kelly, but actually stopping the clock for a second, I just want to speak to, we know it's 4 minutes to the hour. We have on the back end here decided to extend this conversation by 10 minutes, just so we can get to all of the really important questions that have been brought forward. So thank you to everybody who has done that. The next question is, are there fundraising requirements for the chapters? So I understand that to be like, is there a quota or a requirement to raise?
We don't currently have sort of a dollar amount fundraising criteria, right? What we want chapters to do is be involved in fundraising, whether that's at the local level or it's partnering with us on the annual Movement Equals Medicine. So it's going to look different everywhere. And it is a requirement that there's involvement, that you cultivate donors locally and do that type of thing. But we don't have a dollar amount set right now as a requirement.
I just wanted to hop over now to some of the questions that we have received from our very beloved She Recovers professional designees. So those include currently our She Recovers coaches, our She Recovers yoga teachers, and next year soon to be She Recovers dance facilitators. So they're asking, if you apply for a chapter and you don't get selected, can you still have a sharing circle in your area? And can a sharing circle be hosted by a coach to take place monthly without being part of a chapter? So there's lots of these similar questions. So I just want to bring forward to say that as a She Recovers professional designee, you are absolutely welcome to facilitate a sharing circle in your community. We are just currently working on all of the materials to help you to get started with that, or to relaunch them if you were already doing it prior to the pandemic that we experienced. And we plan to have those materials available to you by the end of August. So please know we're very close to being able to reignite local connections through a sharing circle in your local area. So thank you to all of the professional designees who did that in the past. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you everyone for your excitement to relaunch those. Again, you're not required to have a chapter to be able to facilitate a sharing circle. It's very important. They also serve as incubators as well, to be able to create the potential for a chapter. We can't have a chapter without the people. And so sharing circles are a really important part of that process. Somebody else has asked if there is a Facebook community group already. Does this mean it's already a chapter, or is there a central list of local in-person get-togethers of all types? So, as we previously said, these groups are going to serve as the incubator, but they are not the chapter. You are still encouraged to apply to have your community group become a chapter. And like Kelly mentioned, the difference there is you will be resourced with extra materials, extra volunteers, and additional support from She Recovers headquarters to make your community very successful. Let me just see here. Would She Recovers consider allowing trained volunteers to start running sharing circles instead of only the professional designees? Is there anyone able to answer that question? Susan, would you be able to respond to that?
Lisa, I think we have talked about how we could eventually extend our network, but we don't have the capacity right now to do the training beyond the people who are trained through our certification programs. So we are looking into that though, because we know that that's something important, but it is a benefit of being a coach designee or a trauma-informed yoga teacher. So that's where we are right now. More will evolve though as we grow. So it needs to be able to serve the communities.
Because I just want to say too, the other thing that makes these sharing circles so different and unique is that they are professionally facilitated and peer supported. And so it is really important that we maintain that consistency as a trauma-informed space, that our circles are facilitated by She Recovers professionals. So thank you, Susan, to speaking to that. Go ahead, Dawn, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that right now we have She Recovers trauma-informed yoga teachers, She Recovers designated coaches, and in the fall, we'll also be able to designate other professionals as She Recovers professionals. So therapists, for instance, who have been expressing interest in becoming She Recovers designated won't have to become a coach to do that. So it will open up the more opportunities in communities for other types of professionals to do our 10-hour designation and thus take on the sharing circle projects.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dawn. I just want to, I still have a few more questions in the feed here, but I do just want to invite anyone who would love to speak to use their voice to bring their questions forward. Please do use the reaction function and electronically raise your hand. Kathy, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, Kathy Robbins here. I was driving, so I pulled into a parking lot. This is really very exciting. And really, my question was, we've had an existing sharing circle since 2019, I think, at the Cape/Boston. But I think Dawn answered it in my question that we don't we have to apply to become a chapter. So that has been answered. But I also wanted to say that while I've been on this call, I've had several people private message me and say they would like to be involved in the Boston/Cape Cod applying for a chapter. So it's just very exciting. And I just wanted to thank you all for all the work that you've put into this, and also to say to anybody else in the Boston/Cape Cod area, if you're interested, contact me. And we also have a Facebook page with over 300, I think we have over 325 people now. But because of the pandemic, we have, we haven't been meeting in person. But we're getting more and more active, and we got a lot going on. So we'd love to have anybody that's interested. So you can either contact me through that Facebook page or directly. So that's all I wanted to say. Looking forward to it. We're going to apply for a chapter. And I understand you're only doing 5, but eventually I believe we'll be a chapter one way or another. So thanks so much for this. It's really very exciting.
Thank you so much, Kathy. We super appreciate all that you have done and your wonderful light and enthusiasm. It's definitely radiates across the screens.
Thank you. So nice to see everyone.
Brilliant. Another question that I have in the feed here is there a way to ask for others in my area to connect so we know where each other is located? Now, another participant earlier on in the chat feed, if Liana or Kelly could repost this, we actually have a local connection document available. You do have to be a member of the She Recovers Together global Facebook group to be able to access this document. But there is a connection document where you can find other people that are in your local area to reach out to them directly. So if somebody can post that in the chat feed, I will just speak again to say for the people who are listening in audio, that is pinned as a featured post within our She Recovers Together private Facebook group. And there are hundreds of people listed in that directory. Another way to connect with people is again through those community groups. If you visit the website, community, and then click on community groups. Some of them are active, some of them are not. As mentioned before, that is our next priority to work on, is really getting those spaces, the support that they need to be active and to be stewarding those community conversations. Just one last question. If there is any more folks who want to speak their questions forward, please do raise your hand in the reaction portion of your screen. We're just about to wrap up here.
Oh, I can unmute myself. I just want to say I'm incredibly proud of you all, seriously. I'm sitting here in the UK and I know one day it will be opened here, one way or another. But wow, you guys have seriously inspired me and you guys can do this. And I'm just so incredibly proud of you all. That's all I wanted to say. Yeah, I'm cheering you all on. Thank you.
So wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie. Another question that I just caught in the chat feed, I apologize, I missed this before. Can sharing circles or chapters go into the House of Corrections? 85 to 90% of women in our local jails are in for drug or alcohol related offenses. Kelly, I would love if you could respond to that question.
Well, that's a great question. I am not sure the answer to that. I haven't gotten that before. If Susan looks like you have a response, why don't you go for it?
So one of the requirements or one of the chapter activities that we're asking everybody to do is some service work, because we do feel that that's an important component to recovery. And that's exactly what a group of She Recovers volunteers would be able to do. And of course, you have to work with your local, law enforcement and or corrections facilities to actually make sure that you get, most of them make you go through training to get approved to be able to go in and take meetings, but absolutely, that is something that, gosh, I would love to see that. Yes.
And if Elise is still with us, Elise, I would love if you could hop on and share with folks how they can become a volunteer right now, how they can get involved with She Recovers. In the process leading up to applying for a chapter, or to just get started today. Elise, are you here? Are you able to speak to that?
I am. I'm here. Thank you so much. It's great to strike while the iron's hot, right? I love seeing all of the passion about the chapters. But first and foremost, we would love to get you involved as a volunteer with She Recovers. If you can please visit sherecovers.org, get involved. And the first thing you'll see on that Get Involved page is going to be a link to our volunteer registration. You'll complete this short 10-minute registration form. You'll upload a volunteer agreement and give us some information about yourself, very specifically the roles that you would like to hold within She Recovers Foundation. On this registration form, we do have the chapter roles and leads. This will just help us to understand what you're thinking of pursuing. You don't have to commit to anything that you do check the box on, but it's saying, I would like more information about being a chapter lead or about doing development for a chapter. This information will be helpful as we send out information and getting you involved. We're trying very diligently now to gather as much information on our volunteers as possible so that we can keep you connected, because we recover together. And in this way, we want to make sure that we can recognize our volunteers, because without you, all of this amazing work wouldn't be done, especially in as timely as it is now. So sherecovers.org. If you want more information about volunteering, if you have general questions that aren't answered online, please feel free to reach out to me. I will put my email in the chat right now. I welcome your emails. Let's get in touch. I would love to share more information with you, but get involved as soon as you can so that you can be part of this amazing network.
Thank you, Elise.
Thank you, Elise. I think that's it for questions. Kelly, if you want to wrap up.
That's great. Well, thank you everyone for those amazing questions, for your joining us today, for celebrating this moment in time. I really love the energy of this group. I can't wait to meet you in person someday and have conversations with you guys as you are forming, you all as you are forming chapters. So thank you so much for joining us. Look for the Q&A to come out. Can't wait to get your applications, and thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. And as Kelly mentioned before, if you do have any questions, please email srfchapters@sherecovers.org. You're also welcome to use the event feature that you joined this conversation from today to have some discussions and connect with people there and ask more questions that we'd be happy to answer. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our volunteers who continue to bring life to this movement and steward our spaces. Thank you to the team and for everybody who lended their time and energy to us for this conversation today. We absolutely couldn't do it without you.